Well, thank you all for joining us. I'm Kevin RIchert from Idaho Education News, and it's my pleasure to moderate this and my pleasure to get together with three of my favorite smart reporters. We're going to try to recap what has happened in politics in just the past few days and what is to come next week when the legislature returns to town. And I'm joined by Betsy Russell of Idaho Press and, of course, the Eye on Boise blog, Corbin from Idaho Capital Sun, and Margaret Carmel from BoiseDev.com. And let's just begin with what the heck is going on with Brad and Janice these days. We had another chapter that unfolded on Friday. Betsy, you want to take that one away?
The governor had left town for a couple of days last week. None of us actually knew he had until he posted something on Facebook showing himself at former President Trump's America First Policy Summit Gala wearing a tuxedo and being recognized by the former president. And a day earlier, Lieutenant Governor Janice McGeachin had posted something saying that she'd just come back from a meeting with former President Trump at Mar-a-Lago and that they talked about issues. And then on Friday, the lieutenant governor put out a press release accusing the governor of violating the law by not notifying her that he was leaving the state and making her acting governor. And he, of course, had sent her a letter saying, I'm not making you acting governor if I leave the state. And they continue to have this dispute over what the rules are and what the Constitution means. And the courts have been divided on this issue. So we don't know where it'll go.
And it really just feels like the whole subtext is Janice McGeachin really wants President Trump's endorsement. And maybe you have Governor Little wanting that same endorsement, or at least maybe trying to keep Trump neutral in this race. I mean, that feels like the story behind the story here. Certainly could well be. I mean, the subtext here, of course, is that our lieutenant governor is running against the governor in next spring's May Republican primary, along with a whole bunch of other people. So we got a lot of politics going on. Governor Little, of course, hasn't even yet formally announced that he's running for re-election, but he's been doing a lot of fundraising. He's raising money like he's running. And we should note that as we record this on Monday afternoon, there could be more announcements in this governor's race coming. We're expecting more news on the Democratic side of the ballot. So everything is up in the air. And, you know, even before we had the drama of Friday, we had an election. We had city races all over the state, and we had school board elections all over the state. Margaret, you were covering the municipal races. Get us caught up on what happened and what surprised you, what stood out to you.
Well, I think what surprised me the most of all in Boise was how well the incumbents did. If you drove around Boise prior to Election Day last week, you saw a lot of signs for the people running against City Council member Lisa Sanchez and City Council member Holly Woodings. In the Sanchez race, you saw, Greg McMillan, a real estate agent, was spending big money. We had massive billboards on State Street. There were all kinds of yard signs. People in that district have been getting inundated with mailers for weeks and, trying to unseat Lisa Sanchez. He was pitching himself as a middle of the road, moderate candidate. And frankly, he made very few specific statements on policy. The only thing he really said that he concretely supported was supporting first responders. He was backed by the police union and the fire union. But there was a lot of attention on that race. Over 10,000 people voted in that district. And Lisa Sanchez ran away with it. She just took a commanding lead early, and no one ever really caught up to her as more of those ballots came in. You saw the same thing for Holly Woodings. She had more challengers in her race. She had three other opponents who were posing a little bit more of a challenge than the other two opponents in District 3, but she still made it out with 49% of the vote, which was a much higher percentage than I think a lot of people expected, including myself. Katie Fight was running against her. She is allied with kind of the vanishing Boise crowd, people that are really skeptical of growth, really skeptical of the way the city has been developing and some of the policies that it's been enacting. And I was thinking that her message was going to get a lot more people out. There was a lot of yard signs. But no, Holly Woodings took off with it. And we also had Steve Madden, a constitutional conservative, in that, in that race. He outperformed, I think, what a lot of people expected for a Republican in one of Boise's most liberal districts. But Katie Feitz still beat him. And then 10% of the vote went to a third challenger, Crispin Gravatt, who was another very similar to Holly Woodings. A lot of the same policy platforms, affordable housing, climate change. He took 10% of the vote. So if you add, his little piece plus Holly Woodings, there was a really strong mandate there to continue doing that. And that is just not what a lot of people expected. And then over 80% of the voters gave a thumbs up to this wastewater bond to upgrade the city sewer system. And I'll tell you, if you looked at any of those social media comment sections, there was a lot of people who were saying, vote no, this is pro-growth. There was a developer-backed PAC that was spending money on this. And there was a lot of people, I think, who were wondering that bond vote was going to be very narrow, because there was a lot of people that had a lot of questions about it prior to Election Day. So when that thing came in with over 80% of the vote, one of the biggest yes votes the city has seen on a bond, I've been told, I think that floored everybody. And so despite the fact that we've been seeing a lot of division on social media, a lot of angry people, a lot of upset people, what I saw from Tuesday's election was a strong mandate that there's a lot of people in the city that want things to keep going the way that they're going.
And these are nonpartisan races, but they definitely have partisan overtones. I mean, it struck me watching it that if you're Boise Democrats, you really wanted the Lisa Sanchez race. You did not want to see that race flip to a candidate with Republican ties. I mean, you had Lucy Willits, who definitely has Republican bona fides, winning a council seat in West Boise, but I think that one was maybe not as big a deal to Democrats, but the Sanchez race definitely was.
Well, and thank you for bringing up the Willits race. I mean, if you looked at that, you look at Lucy Willits' platform. Yes, she's a Republican. She's a fiscal conservative. Yeah. She's more conservative than everybody else. She worked
for Mike Simpson. She worked for Tom Loon. I mean, she's an R.
Yeah, no, she's that's what she does. But but she has admitted during the campaign, she had some skepticism about maybe we shouldn't be spending as much money as we're going to spend on climate change. But she said, yes, climate change is real. She said addressing homelessness is a major priority of hers. And she also came out in terms of, yes, we need more density to accommodate more people and address the housing issues. That is not the farthest right you could be, whereas you looked at Steve Madden, who was running in District 5, and he had much further right position. So as far as Republicans go, I would say that's a win for a lot of the people who are in Boise, because yes, Lucy Willits is a Republican, but she's a moderate Republican. That is a very different situation than Steve Madden, who was saying, yes, let's stop growth. Let's slow down growth. Let's, I think at one point he said he is not a supporter of the minimum wage. He did not support addressing he did not put forward any sort of concrete ideas on what he wanted to see on affordable housing. So I think when you look at the Republican Party, just because someone's a Republican, that doesn't necessarily tell you everything you need to know about their views. There's just like there are different kinds of Democrats, there are different kinds of Republicans, and I think it's important to split those hairs beyond just what the letter next to their name is.
Mm-hmm. And I'll be really interested as we came out of these school board elections to see exactly what you're talking about with some of these newly elected school trustees. We had two trustees winning open races, two trustee candidates winning open races in West Ada. Both had ties to Republicans, Republican donors. That's not unprecedented. We've seen, partisan donations in school board races before. This just felt like a little bit more of a partisan race. The Nampa school board races felt that way too. But as I watched those school board races, there were no real strong, obvious patterns that emerged, because you had some hard right candidates around the state that lost. You had a lot of incumbents lose. You had 21 incumbents lose on Tuesday. So very, very interesting school board elections. And that wasn't the only bit of news we had last week too. Redistricting kind of comes to a conclusion in terms of the maps, but now we get to the litigation process. And Clark, let's get you in on this because you've been following this really closely. We have maps and now we have the path to the courthouse.
Yeah, we do. We're nearly through with what is essentially the process of using new U.S. Census Bureau data every 10 years to redraw our state's 35 legislative district boundaries and our 2 congressional district boundaries. This is a process that is taking place, a similar process is taking place in states across the country right now, and it's required by the Idaho Constitution and the U.S. Constitution to get at this idea of having political representation be as close to equal as, sorry about that, as close to equal as possible. And last week on Friday, the commission voted unanimously to adopt a legislative map that splits Idaho into 35 legislative districts, which is the requirement, splits up 8 different counties. That was approved unanimously. They also approved a congressional map, but that was on a split vote 4-2. And the question on the congressional vote was basically what to do with Ada County and the Treasure Valley. The map that they approved splits Ada County between the first and second congressional districts. That's been kind of the process for 50 years, Commissioner Bart Davis said. Since 1971, Ada County has been split between the 2 districts. It just comes down to
where that line falls between CD1 and CD2. It's been,
that line would be moving a little bit farther west. When you look at coming into Ada County, it would go down State Highway 55 to Eagle Road, over to Victory Road, and then over to the interstate. Almost all of Boise, Betsy and I were having an interesting conversation with the commission staff after the vote on Friday. Almost all of Boise, all but about 3,000 people will now be in the 2nd congressional district. Almost all of Boise is going to be in that 2nd district. Just about 3,000 people will be up north in the 1st district. There was a little bit of an error with some potential confusion on the agenda for Friday's meeting. So we're going to see those votes taken again on Wednesday, November 10th of this week. But I've been told that they're just doing that out of caution, so there's not a flaw in the process. That's not like they're reconsidering their votes on the map. But Betsy and I were both there on Friday, and Kevin, like you said, now this sets up a situation where any number of challenges could come from across the state. And so that's kind of where we're at now, I think. Where would you say, Betsy, we left off?
Yeah, I mean, the commission's made it pretty clear that they've made their decisions on the maps. They're going to revote again, but nothing is likely to change there. Interestingly, the congressional map continues to divide Ada County, but this time, as Clark said, it really doesn't divide Boise that much. Boise mostly is going in the 2nd CD. Meridian and Eagle are going in the 1st CD. So perhaps the line was a little more thoughtfully drawn through Ada County. The tradition certainly has been to just cut right down the middle of Ada County and Boise, basically ensuring that the state's largest population center cannot dominate either of Idaho's 2 congressional districts. Personally, I live in Boise, and I used to live in District 1, and 10 years ago, I moved into District 2, and I didn't even move. The line moved. And so there was talk this year of doing something different, of not splitting up counties, of trying to keep them all together. The commission did not go that way. But in 10 more years, if Idaho gets a 3rd congressional district, we may see an all Ada County district or an all Treasure Valley district. And that would really change the dynamic to have 3 members of Congress.
Yeah, that's a good point, Betsy. It kind of feels like an intimidating process. It's kind of slow moving. It started back on September 1st. There were, 18 public hearings across the state, but it's a really important process because assuming these maps survive any kind of a potential challenge, they're going to be in place for 10 years. And so it's really going to have a big impact on shaping Idaho elections and Idaho politics over the next 10 years. Betsy made a great point. That's something that Idahoans are going to encounter depending on where they live. They may not move, but the line could move. And so this is really going to affect who Idahoans can vote for Congress and for the legislature, starting with the primary, which right now is scheduled to take place in May of 2022. And so it is an important process. It feels really insidery and a little bit intimidating. We do expect challenges to come forward, but it is such an important process because it's really going to come down to what legislative and congressional districts Idahoans live in, and therefore, who's going to be representing them and their neighbors in Congress and in the legislature for the next.
And it's really not a question of will there be lawsuits, it's a question of how many and where they come from. Margaret, you were talking before we pressed record, Ada County's already getting ready to sue. Rumblings of lawsuits in eastern Idaho. I mean, there are going to be multiple challenges here.
That's right. And regardless of how the challenges come out, and even if the map is redrawn, there are going to be huge changes in the Idaho legislature as
Yeah.
redistricting, just as there were 10 years ago when there were a dozen potential matchups between incumbents of the same party, and they had to decide whether to run against each other or retire. We're going to see a bunch of that this time too.
Yeah, and some of them right here in the Treasure Valley. I mean, potentially you have Stephen Thane and Scott Grow in the same Senate district. You have Abby Lee and Jim Rice in the same Senate district, potentially, if everybody runs. And, who knows who runs and who retires, or, how this all shakes out, or if the maps actually survive. A court challenge. Okay. Next Monday, legislature comes back to town. We're going to be there for that. What should people be looking for and waiting for and expecting to see unfold when lawmakers come back to town?
Oh my gosh. I mean, what are people always expecting?
It's an open-ended question, I know.
They have publicly announced that they want to hold it to 3 days. And this is technically not a special session. It's a reconvening of the session that we were already in, which already was the longest legislative session in the history of Idaho. And there's no guarantee it'll be over in 3 days. The legislative Republican leaders have said they want only 2 topics addressed. One is vaccine mandates, and the other is the House dealing with its unfinished business on an ethics complaint against Representative Priscilla Giddings from Whitebird with regard to publicizing the identity of the young woman who accused former Representative Aaron Von Ellinger of rape. So those are the 2 things ostensibly on the agenda. Vaccine mandates is a big topic. Basically, what they're looking at is pushback to the Biden administration's proposed new rules. Idaho is already a part of 2 lawsuits against those rules, and there was a court ruling over the weekend that halted the OSHA rule regarding private employers, which is the one that the state has most recently sued on. So there's no telling what all is going to come out of this. Part of the talk among the legislators has been setting aside $2 million of taxpayer funds in a legal fund for these legal challenges against these rules. So that may be one of the things we can look forward to seeing.
Yeah, at this point, it's not a surprise that the legislature will be reconvening. It's been momentum building towards this really since the summer. The lieutenant governor tried to call for a special session. A group of 16 conservative legislators tried to reconvene and failed. And then we had this committee on federalism that met this fall and basically called for the legislature to consider a bill that would criminalize any local government or state employee who helped implement any of these COVID-19 rules from the Biden administration. And so I think that's going to be the big showdown, but certainly the House will vote on the ethics complaint. But it's been gearing up all summer, and I think we all expected that this day would be coming. And yeah, it starts next Monday, and it's kind of, we see so many of these like state versus the federal government showdowns, and this is another one. And it could be a number of multiple bills introduced or considered. I think by the Ways and Means Committee is where they'll start. And then from there, the process will be off and running with both the Idaho House of Representatives and the Idaho Senate in session.
And not just the competing legislation, which will be interesting to watch unfold. This could be something we haven't seen on the House floor in a long time. There could be a real battle over the Ethics Committee's investigation and findings in the Priscilla Giddings case. Because if you recall, back in the spring, Ethics Committee met, recommended sanctions against then Representative Aaron Von Ellinger. He resigned before he could even come to a vote. So the House didn't have to take this up. But that's not going to happen this time. I mean, this could really get, this could get tense, this could get ugly on the House floor, could it not?
It could certainly.
You could
Representative Giddings has a history of pushing the rules to the limits on the floor of the House and trying parliamentary maneuvers to slow things down. And she and her supporters will probably be defending her, but that ethics committee was unanimous, and it was almost all Republicans. It was her colleagues. It's the very people who are going to be voting on these.
We're going to get this all done in 3 days, ostensibly. We'll see. Well, that kind of gets us caught up, and we'll definitely watch all of this, and we'll be probably tapping on your expertise again here at City Club to talk about this stuff down the road. Betsy Russell, Clark Corbin, Margaret Carmel, thanks for joining us here and getting us caught up.
Thanks
Thanks
Kevin.
for having us, Kevin.